Have you ever found yourself lost in thought, questioning everything from the meaning of life to why people behave the way they do? You might have been told, you think too much. But what if I told you that your mind isn't a burden? It's a depth the world doesn't always understand. In this video, we'll explore what psychology says about deep thinkers, and most importantly, how to know if you're one of them. This is not just about personality. It's about a way of processing reality that's deeply rooted in how your mind is wired. So stay with me till the end. And if this resonates with your inner world, don't forget to subscribe to Whispers of Psychology for more deep dives into the mind that truly matter. Let's begin by untangling one of the most common misunderstandings in modern psychology, the confusion between overthinking and deep thinking. They might look similar on the surface. Both involve spending a lot of time in your head, revisiting thoughts and analyzing situations. But under psychological examination, these two processes are fundamentally different in origin, function, and effect. Overthinking is a cognitive trap. It often comes from a place of anxiety, fear of uncertainty, or low self-esteem. The mind keeps cycling through the same thought loops, not because it's searching for truth, but because it's trying to avoid perceived threats or negative outcomes. You overanalyze past conversations, imagine worst-case scenarios, and replay what went wrong over and over again, without reaching a satisfying conclusion. Overthinking exhausts the mind and tends to be emotionally draining. Psychologically, this process is linked with what cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, refers to as rumination. It's associated with negative emotions like guilt, regret, and worry. Neurologically, it activates the brain's default mode network, particularly when not engaged in external tasks. When it becomes chronic, it can even fuel conditions like anxiety and depression. Now contrast that with deep thinking. Deep thinking is not reactive, it's reflective. It arises not from anxiety, but from curiosity. A deep thinker doesn't obsess over every word they said at a party. Instead, they might ponder why humans feel social pressure in the first place. The focus shifts from self-criticism to systems, patterns, and purpose. Deep thinking involves exploring complex ideas, questioning assumptions, and connecting seemingly unrelated concepts. It's a form of cognitive exploration, often stimulated by reading, observing, or even silence. Unlike overthinking, deep thinking often leads to insight, clarity, or meaningful questions, even if the final answer remains unknown. Psychologists studying metacognition, the ability to think about thinking, often find that deep thinkers have higher metacognitive awareness. This means they're not just aware of what they think, but how they think and why they think a certain way. It's a self-reflective process that promotes growth, wisdom, and often emotional intelligence. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist and founder of analytical psychology, believed that certain individuals naturally operate on what he called an introverted intuitive function. These individuals tend to look inward and uncover symbolic meaning in events. They are not interested in surface-level facts, but in the deeper layers of the psyche, archetypes, motivations, and hidden truths. Jungian deep thinkers often explore ideas that many others may overlook or avoid, such as death, purpose, identity, and the unconscious mind. There's also a temporal dimension to consider. Overthinking is often past-focused. Why did I say that? Or what if I fail tomorrow? Deep thinking is more timeless. The questions are broader, like, what does it mean to live authentically? Or what is consciousness? The outcomes of these two processes are also telling. Overthinking leads to emotional fatigue, indecision, and paralysis. It keeps you stuck. Deep thinking, on the other hand, may create temporary confusion or uncertainty, but over time, it contributes to personal insight, emotional maturity, and intellectual clarity. In short, one narrows your world, the other expands it. Another key difference is agency. Overthinking feels compulsive, like you can't stop even if you want to. Deep thinking feels intentional. You choose to go deeper because it feels meaningful. You're not a victim of your mind. You're a participant in a journey of understanding. Let's also not forget the emotional tone. Overthinking carries a negative emotional charge: worry, fear, regret. Deep thinking is often emotionally neutral or even positive. Curiosity, wonder, reflection. That emotional tone is a signal, a clue that tells you whether your mind is trapped or exploring. From a psychological health perspective, Deep thinking is constructive. It fosters mental flexibility and creativity, and it's often linked to what positive psychology refers to as flow states. Those moments where you're so absorbed in contemplation or creation that time seems to disappear. So the next time someone says, "You think too much," ask yourself this: am I ruminating from fear or reflecting from depth? Am I obsessing over outcomes or seeking understanding? Because knowing the difference doesn't just change how you see your thoughts. It changes how you see yourself. Psychology has long sought to understand the traits that make certain individuals think more deeply than others. Deep thinkers aren't simply people who are smart or quiet. They process the world in a different way, internally, reflectively, and often through layers that most people overlook. When we talk about deep thinkers, we're referring to individuals who engage in complex cognitive activity that's not just about solving problems, but about understanding existence, emotions, and human condition. So, what are the psychological signs that indicate someone is a true deep thinker? One of the most telling signs is introspection. Deep thinkers spend a significant amount of time reflecting on their thoughts, emotions, motives, and values. According to developmental psychologist Robert Kegan, people who operate at higher levels of self-authoring consciousness engage in constant reflection, not just on what happens to them, but on what it means to them. Introspection isn't self-absorption, it's self-examination. A deep thinker constantly asks, "Why do I feel this way? What does this mean about me? And how is this connected to something larger?" That reflective loop is foundational to their psychological profile. Another major sign is intellectual curiosity. Deep thinkers are rarely satisfied with surface-level answers. If you tell them that the sky is blue because of light scattering, they will want to know why light scatters, how perception works, and what it reveals about human consciousness. This relentless curiosity is connected to what psychologists call the need for cognitive closure, a motivational trait that differs significantly between individuals. Deep thinkers have a low need for closure, meaning they are comfortable with ambiguity and complexity. They would rather explore possibilities than prematurely arrive at conclusions. This makes them prone to question norms, challenge dogma, and explore philosophical or abstract questions that others might avoid. A third psychological marker is emotional depth. Deep thinkers tend to feel things more intensely, not necessarily in terms of frequent emotional outbursts, but in how deeply they process emotional events. A brief conversation, a small rejection, or a philosophical quote can stay with them for days or weeks, triggering layers of analysis and emotional response. According to Elaine Aron's research on highly sensitive persons, HSPs, many deep thinkers are also emotionally sensitive, not in the sense of fragility, but in their ability to notice subtleties and deeply experience emotions. They often empathize strongly with others, and may even carry emotional burdens that aren't theirs. Their capacity for compassion and moral imagination is unusually developed because they constantly consider the inner lives of others. Linked to this emotional depth is a preference for solitude. Deep thinkers often seek out time alone, not because they dislike people, but because solitude provides a mental space needed for deep processing. Psychologist Carl Jung referred to this trait as introverted intuition, where the unconscious mind constantly synthesizes ideas and images into inner meaning. This doesn't mean that all deep thinkers are introverts, but many are. They find meaning not in external noise, but in internal silence. Time alone helps them recharge, reflect, and process information in a way that social settings often disrupt. Another sign is a tendency toward abstract and symbolic thinking. Deep thinkers are often drawn to metaphor, philosophy, myth, or even spiritual symbolism, not necessarily for religious reasons, but because these domains offer layers of meaning. While many people operate with concrete thinking, focus on facts, tasks, and immediate reality, deep thinkers naturally gravitate toward the abstract. They see meaning in stories, archetypes, dreams, and patterns. This is consistent with Jungian psychology's idea that some minds operate in a symbolic mode, interpreting life through inner images, not just logic. Additionally, deep thinkers often show a pattern of pattern recognition and systems thinking. They don't just notice isolated details. They connect them, whether it's noticing recurring themes in human behavior, the deeper causes behind societal problems, or the invisible dynamics in relationships. They are attuned to the interconnectedness of things. This kind of thinking is often seen in people who score high in what psychologist Jonathan Haidt describes as integrated complexity, the ability to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously and weave them into a coherent mental framework. One subtle but powerful trait among deep thinkers is their discomfort with superficiality. Small talk, gossip, or empty routines often drain them. They crave depth in conversations, in relationships, and even in entertainment. They are the kind of people who can feel mentally exhausted after a social event that lacks substance, yet feel energized after a long conversation about ethics, dreams, or philosophy. They often report feeling disconnected from mainstream trends or modern life because much of what they encounter feels shallow or hollow. This isn't arrogance, it's alignment. Their inner world is too rich to thrive on small ideas. Psychologically, deep thinkers also tend to have a strong inner critic. This isn't always negative. It often keeps them striving for authenticity, personal growth, or truth, but it can lead to self-doubt or emotional fatigue, especially if their depth isn't understood or validated by others. Their thinking mind never shuts off, which is both a gift and a challenge. Finally, deep thinkers often exhibit what Abraham Maslow called self-actualization tendencies, a desire to realize their full potential, understand their purpose, and live with integrity. They are not content with surviving. They seek meaning, truth, and alignment. They often find fulfillment in creative expression, intellectual exploration, or inner healing, pursuits that connect them with something greater than themselves. When we look at these psychological patterns, introspection, curiosity, emotional sensitivity, abstraction, solitude, symbolic reasoning, we see not a disorder or eccentricity, but a different operating system of a human mind. Deep thinkers are not slow, overly serious, or too much. They're wired for depth in a world that often rewards speed and surface. Recognizing these signs isn't just about labeling yourself. It's about honoring the richness of your inner world and learning how to work with your mind, not against it. One of the most psychologically significant yet often painful experiences for deep thinkers is their struggle with social connection. While they may crave meaningful relationships, they frequently feel misunderstood, unseen, or even alienated in everyday social environments. This paradox of desiring connection while feeling detached is not due to social ineptitude or lack of interest, but rather the result of how their minds operate at a fundamentally different depth than those around them. Deep thinkers often approach life from a place of complexity. They are more attuned to subtleties, tone, intention, nuance, and they question the deeper motives behind surface behavior. But in a world that often runs on speed, efficiency, and surface-level interactions, this kind of depth can feel burdensome, both to them and to others. While most people might find comfort in casual conversations or quick small talk, deep thinkers may find such interactions mentally draining or emotionally unsatisfying. They may smile and nod, but inside, they're yearning for authenticity, truth, or a spark of something more meaningful. Psychologically, this creates what many researchers call a social misalignment, a mismatch between a person's preferred mode of communication and the social norms around them. Social psychologists have found that individuals with high levels of introspection and intellectual depth often experience a sense of invisibility in group settings. They may hold back from speaking, not because they lack thoughts, but because they're waiting for the right moment, the right depth to engage. And in many environments, that moment never comes. This tendency towards silence is frequently misunderstood. Others might perceive them as aloof, distant, or even arrogant. But in reality, deep thinkers are often observing, analyzing, and assessing before they respond. They're not disinterested. They're deeply engaged, just internally. This internal orientation makes it harder for them to navigate fast-paced or emotionally shallow social dynamics. And over time, the constant need to adapt or mask their depth can lead to emotional exhaustion. Research in personality psychology shows that deep thinkers often score high in the openness to experience trait, which includes a love for ideas, imagination, aesthetic sensitivity, and intellectual curiosity. However, they may also score lower in extroversion, which can make socializing in large or noisy environments feel overstimulating or meaningless. It's not that they dislike people. They just prefer interactions that are authentic, vulnerable, and mentally engaging. Because of this, deep thinkers often develop a small circle of trusted relationships, or even prefer solitude. They are not socially broken. They are selectively social. They may connect more deeply with books, ideas, or inner landscapes than with people who don't share their level of insight or emotional depth. This selectivity isn't superiority. It's self-preservation. They guard their energy because shallow interactions deplete them, while meaningful exchanges nourish them. Another psychological element at play is existential sensitivity. Deep thinkers often wrestle with life's big questions. What is my purpose? Why do people suffer? What does it mean to live truthfully? These questions create a lens through which they view the world, one that often clashes with mainstream values like image, status, or material success. Because they don't conform to societal expectations easily, they may feel like outsiders or even carry a quiet sense of loneliness, even when surrounded by others. This existential lens can also lead to moral idealism. Deep thinkers tend to have high standards for themselves and for others. They value authenticity, integrity, and emotional honesty. So when they encounter hypocrisy, manipulation, or superficiality in social contexts, they often withdraw not out of judgment, but because such environments feel dissonant to their internal compass. Over time, this withdrawal can make them feel isolated, leading to what psychologists call social fatigue. The emotional toll of constantly navigating environments that don't reflect your values or cognitive style. Yet, there is a hidden strength in this experience. Many deep thinkers turn their sense of alienation into creative or intellectual expression. Writers, philosophers, artists, and visionaries throughout history have channeled this social disconnection into works that change the world. What they lacked in social ease, they compensated for with insight, originality, and courage. Carl Jung called this process individuation, the journey of becoming who you truly are, even if it means walking a path apart from the crowd. But individuation doesn't mean isolation. For deep thinkers, healing and growth often come when they find others who think and feel at similar depths. These relationships may be rare, but they are transformative. Conversations become sacred. Silence is shared, not feared. Ideas are welcomed, not dismissed. In such spaces, deep thinkers don't have to explain themselves. They're simply understood. It's important for deep thinkers to recognize that their social struggles are not evidence of flaw. They stem from depth, not deficiency. But at the same time, awareness is key. Psychology encourages us to balance inner depth with outer connection. Building small bridges, through shared interests, empathetic listening, or emotional vulnerability, can open pathways to meaningful human connection, even in a noisy world. Ultimately, the social struggle of the deep thinker is not about being too different. It's about living in a world that often doesn't reward quiet insight or emotional depth. But that doesn't mean those traits aren't needed. In fact, in an age of noise and distraction, the world may need deep thinkers more than ever, not to speak louder, but to speak wiser. And in time, those who think deeply may find not just understanding, but kinship with those who, too, have chosen to dive below the surface. In a fast-paced world where quick answers and instant gratification dominate, deep thinking can sometimes feel like a burden. It slows you down, makes you question things others take for granted, and leaves you seated with complexity when the world demands simplicity. But the truth is, deep thinking is not a weakness. It's a quiet strength. It is a psychological gift that allows people to connect with meaning, not just information. It allows them to ask not just how something works, but why it matters. And when nurtured properly, it becomes a tool for personal transformation and collective insight. Psychologists have long studied the connection between cognitive depth and creative insight. Research shows that people with deep thinking tendencies often display what's known as divergent thinking, the ability to generate multiple ideas, perspectives, or interpretations of a single concept. This ability not only supports creativity, but also helps deep thinkers navigate life's uncertainties with mental flexibility. While many people seek certainty, deep thinkers are more comfortable exploring the gray areas. They are more willing to tolerate ambiguity, to sit with questions, and to evolve their beliefs over time. This openness to complexity isn't just intellectually rewarding, it also builds resilience. According to existential psychology, people who engage regularly in deep reflection are more likely to develop an internal sense of meaning and purpose. Instead of relying on external validation or fleeting goals, they ground themselves in personal values, philosophical questions, or spiritual frameworks that guide their actions. When life becomes difficult or disorienting, deep thinkers often cope by returning to these inner foundations. In this way, deep thinking becomes a stabilizing force, a kind of inner compass that remains steady in chaotic times. But nurturing deep thinking requires intentional care. In a culture that prioritizes multitasking, constant stimulation, and shallow productivity, the contemplative mind can easily become overwhelmed or undervalued. Deep thinkers must learn how to protect their mental space. That means creating boundaries around their time and attention. It means unplugging from noise, seeking silence, and engaging in practices that support reflection, like journaling, reading, creative writing, or meditative solitude. Carl Jung believed that the path to self-realization begins with turning inward. He called it the process of individuation, the journey of integrating the unconscious with the conscious and discovering the whole self beneath the masks we wear. Deep thinking is essential to this process. It asks us not to conform, but to awaken, to notice our shadow, to question our conditioning, and to align with a more authentic version of who we are. Deep thinkers, in this sense, are often on a lifelong path of becoming, not to be perfect, but to be whole. However, this gift can turn into a burden if it's not balanced with emotional care. Deep thinkers are vulnerable to overprocessing, spending so much time analyzing or philosophizing that they disconnect from their emotional needs. When everything becomes a mental exercise, they may lose touch with the simplicity of joy, the importance of presence, or the healing power of human connection. Psychology reminds us that depth must be paired with grounding. We cannot live only in the mind. We must also listen to the body, the heart, and the moment. That's why it's crucial for deep thinkers to cultivate practices that balance their mental energy. Nature, movement, art, and authentic conversation can all serve as grounding agents. These aren't distractions, they're nourishment. They provide a bridge between the rich inner world and the living outer one. Without this balance, depth can lead to detachment, and wisdom can turn into withdrawal. Another powerful way to nurture deep thinking is through creative expression. Many deep thinkers struggle to articulate their thoughts directly, but through art, writing, storytelling, or music, they can give form to what they feel inside. Creativity becomes a way to translate the ineffable into something others can feel and understand. Psychologists have long recognized this process as cathartic. It helps reduce internal tension and cultivates clarity. For deep thinkers, creation is often not a hobby, but a necessity, a lifeline between isolation and integration. Importantly, deep thinking contributes not only to personal growth, but to the evolution of collective consciousness. Throughout history, the greatest societal shifts, the breakthroughs in ethics, science, spirituality, and human rights, have often come from individuals who refuse to accept surface-level thinking. They questioned systems, challenged norms, and brought forward new visions that reshape reality. What seemed like too much thinking was, in truth, thinking that mattered. And while not every deep thinker will change the world in visible ways, each one has potential to create ripples within their own lives, relationships, and communities. By listening more deeply, questioning more honestly, and living more consciously, they elevate the collective vibration. Their thoughts become seeds, planted in quiet moments, but bearing fruit over time. The journey of a deep thinker is not always easy. It involves solitude, discomfort, and often the pain of seeing what others don't. But it also brings richness, a kind of soul-deep awareness that can't be bought, rushed, or replicated. It is a gift to be able to feel deeply, think broadly, and seek truth in a world that often runs on distraction. So to those who feel too sensitive, too thoughtful, or too different, know this: your depth is not your flaw. It is your mirror, your compass, your power. And the more you nurture it, the more you'll see it for what it truly is, not a burden, but a quiet form of brilliance waiting to be lived out loud. As we've explored today, deep thinking is not simply about spending time in your head. It's about how your mind processes reality, questions meaning, and seeks connection beyond the surface. It's a profound psychological orientation that shapes how you see yourself, how you relate to others, and how you interpret the world around you. We began by separating overthinking from deep thinking. While one is rooted in fear and mental loops, The other is grounded in curiosity and clarity. Knowing the difference empowers you to trust your thoughts rather than fear them. Then we uncover the key psychological signs of deep thinkers. Traits like introspection, emotional depth, abstract reasoning, and a thirst for meaning. These are not quirks. They're cognitive strengths, backed by research and insight from depth psychology. We also acknowledge the quiet loneliness many deep thinkers experience in social spaces. Feeling out of sync isn't a failure of character. It's often a sign that you're perceiving more than others realize. But solitude, when honored, can become a source of strength and self-alignment. And finally, we looked at how deep thinking, when nurtured consciously, becomes a gift, not just to the individual, but to the collective. In a noisy, distracted world, depth is a quiet revolution. It's not about thinking more. It's about thinking better, living more consciously, and embracing the full landscape of your inner life. So if you've ever felt too much, too intense, or too different, remember, you're not alone. You're simply wired for depth in a world that often rewards speed. But it's the deep thinkers, the reflective, the intuitive, the quietly wise, who carry the torch for transformation, healing, and truth. Honor your thoughts. Protect your solitude. And above all, don't apologize for the depth that sets you apart. Because somewhere out there, someone is waiting to hear a voice like yours, a voice that doesn't just echo what others say, but dares to speak from the soul.